Okay. I'm going to go ahead and start up a second recording because we had a little problem on Tuesday's um, class session. I'm not sure what happened, but there's really no sound and there's video, but there's absolutely no sound between the second minute and the 33rd minute. So obviously we had some technical difficulties. So I'm going to perform a local recording here as well. And that way I'll be sure that we have duplicates. I have some news. We're running a little bit behind in my in-class session. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. As I was saying, we're running a little behind in my in-class session. So for that reason, I'm going to be changing the exam date to, instead of Tuesday, it's going to be on Thursday. I'm about a half a day behind in my classroom session. The fact that we had this problem with this recording means I'm going to need to cover that material again. So given that, I'm going to extend the exam date. I've cleared that with ProctorU. I can go ahead and change that. Nobody has to re-register. Your registration should extend on to whatever day I extend it to. They'll change the exam date, and that'll be the end of it. And you'll have an additional 2 days to prepare for the examination. All right, you should be seeing the screen, I presume. And today's topic is managing business processes, which really is what, the way to think of business processes are organizations, as we talked about when we looked at the value chain model. They really are an assembly of a series of processes, and processes are organizations of work that could encompass both physical work and or informational work, or it could just be purely physical or purely informational. Naturally, in the field of MIS, we're mainly concerned with information-based processes. And plugin B2, this Prezi, contains relevant content from both Chapter 3, which does discuss processes, does discuss process improvement, does discuss business process reengineering. So it combines that information with the content in plugin B2, which is mainly really about different processes. As an example, process, if you're in the real estate business, showing a home is a process. Showing a home or showing an office building, that is a process. And today, more and more, that process is virtualized because the technology is now such that virtual house tours can be extended, even if it's, even if you're showing the home locally. It's much more convenient for your customer to point them to a virtual tour because they have busy schedules. So, it could be a distance issue, it could be a scheduling issue, but you can point them to the virtual tour and give them a tour of the house. And that kind of, it could be a selling point, or certainly it could be something that would draw them in to, actually come physically look at the home. And this virtual tour, we've always been able to make 3D immersive tour. Well, with the advent of digital cameras came the creation of 3D immersive tours. But now you've got specialized cameras that do take three-dimensional imagery as you go throughout a home, and they can do in minutes literally what used to take hours. So now you can do a 3D tour of a home in about 3 hours, whereas it took 12 hours. That is a 900% improvement. That's really extraordinary. And with virtual tours, also, staging a home is critical. And in the past, staging a home was actually a manual process. If you want to sell a home, it's best to sell it with the furniture in it, not staged. And now you have the ability to actually add stage your virtual home virtually, so you don't actually have to buy the furniture. You don't have to buy the draperies or the curtains. You can alter the paint. You can alter any look of the home that you want through staging. And there are actually some firms out there that specialize in this. And in some cases, it's a service afforded by the real estate company. It is something that obviously would be quite a draw for somebody who was considering whether or not to use a particular realtor. So if you had a realtor that would be willing to do that, and they give some information on staging. Of course, this article was about staging and virtual staging and how beneficial it was to sellers who were seeking to sell their home. So again, it's a kind of technology that it wouldn't be possible without the evolution of technology. In this case, the evolution of the digital camera, so that you now have one that can film three-dimensional imagery and do it rather quickly, and from there you can you can generate that kind of immersive video that you can meander through or navigate through online. So just an example of a business process. So a process, again, is a standard set of activities for accomplishing a task. Processing an order, showing a home, paying a bill, ordering inventory, delivering a product. Processes take inputs and they go through some sort of operation or production, and they produce outputs. And those outputs are directed at another person or another process or another organization, a process within that organization. And the trend in process creation and evolution is to combine more and more, especially when they're looking at information processes, to create longer chains of processes, and in other words, to integrate processes together using computerization. And the goal, of course, is to gain efficiencies or possibly effectiveness, or both. So, for example, a sales order is what we call a cross-functional process, and we'll talk about what that is in just a moment. Just some standard processes within the various functional areas: hiring employees, tracking vacation and sick time, processing sales, manufacturing goods, paying bills, collecting bills or collecting receivables, finalizing your financial statements. These are all processes. order to cash is a process. So, and each of these sub-processes will contain processes within them as well. So you can get pretty granular as far as kind of the nuts and bolts of a process. So you create a customer record, an order to cash. Now, not necessarily so if somebody's paying cash at a retailer, then there's probably not a customer record that's created. A lot of transactions, especially when you purchase in retail, whether you're using cash or whether you're using debit card, there's not necessarily a customer record that's created, but certainly in this particular one we are. So, and then we've got a customer record. We're going to check their credit, verify that they can pay. We're going to create the order. We'll allocate inventory or stock to the order. Check these off if we go. Then we'll pick, pack, and ship. So we're going to pick the product from the allocated stock. We're going to package it, and then we're going to ship it. And once we've shipped it, we're going to invoice. We'll send an invoice to the customer, and that customer, if all goes well, they're going to pay us. This is a cross-functional process. Okay, it crosses the boundaries of various functional areas within the organization. So you have marketing and sales. We've sold it. Someone marketed it to draw the customer, and then someone actually, we had a sales rep who sold, say, the furniture to the customer if we were a furniture retailer. The account was created in accounting, and also accounting probably verified or validated that customer's credit was good and they could actually buy the software, and then you had manufacturing and or operations. If it was a retailer, someone in operations, this transaction was probably made available to them, and they are responsible for both supply chain as well as logistics and shipping functions. So there were implications for each of these functional areas as it related to this one transaction. Now you have a purchase process, or procure to pay, but it's a purchase process. So in purchasing, you negotiate terms, and the terms you negotiate typically are, you get price breaks from suppliers if you buy a certain volume typically, or if you pay within a certain period. So net 10 days will, if you pay within 10 days, that will net you a 10% discount or a 3% discount or whatever the discount is. Once the product is negotiated, once the things we're going to buy is negotiated, then a purchase order, which is an authorization to buy, is issued to the vendor or the supplier, which in turn is converted into a sales order for them. It is a sales. And then they're going to ship the product to us. So there's a lot of product on the other, there's a lot of process on the other side that goes in, remember, to fulfilling the order. So on the other side of, this transaction is this process. So there's the order to cash or order to pay, whatever the process is. So that supplier is going through that process. Then we're going to receive the goods, and we'll match the goods up. We'll have a record of the receipt of the goods and then we'll have an invoice. And when we receive the goods, for example, if we get it on a truck, we're going to unload it. There'll be a bill of lading associated with that truck, and we will have, if the bill of lading didn't match what was actually on the truck, in other words, if the bill of lading said we got 450 boxes, instead we got 435, we will make a notation on that document that there were 435, or there could possibly be some damaged goods. Anything along those lines is going to be documented on the receipt, the receiving documentation. And then when we get the invoice, and assuming the invoice is for 450 boxes, but we actually only got 435, we will adjust the invoice, and then we will settle the payment. So procure to pay is kind of the opposite. Again, another cross-functional process involves, in this case, supply chain management, accounting and finance, and manufacturing and operations. Then you have, these are some additional ones: make to order, make to stock. Make to stock is basically predicated on a forecast. So in make to stock, we forecast what our demand is going to be based on historical numbers, and then we process the amount that aligns with our forecast, and we stock the product, and then we await the orders. In modern manufacturing today, that is not the model of choice, although there's always some forecasting involved in manufacturing more and more. The manufacturing today is predicated on making product that aligns with the orders that are in the order pipeline. And so you see everything is driven by the sales order, aka process of sales order. If there's customization that is involved, that's going to involve design and engineering, perhaps. We're going to buy whatever the inputs we need to produce the product. We'll schedule production, then we'll produce it. And then we're going to check the quality, and then we'll ultimately ship it. That's quite different from make to stock, where it begins with purchasing, and then we schedule production, we produce it, quality control, and then we stock the product. And everything is driven by the forecast. And we do, if there are orders in the pipeline, that's taken into consideration. But make to stock is quite a different process. Processes often have internal and external users. They're often cross-departmental, as we've seen. They're also cross-organizational. So they often cross organizational boundaries, particularly when you look at integrated supply chains. They do cross organizational boundaries. Processes are structured on how it works. So in other words, the technology is aligned with how workers actually do the work. So the UPS guy has one of those Diad devices, and the function of a UPS driver of a UPS truck drives those trucks and delivers product, and does carry a device that records when products, they're able to record to obtain signatures, record when products have been delivered, etc., and that information is wirelessly streamed back to a system that tracks that kind of information, so that customers, can log in and look and see whether or not their package has actually been delivered. In order to understand processes, it's very useful to document them and understand how they operate. And typically, the documentation fairly simple. You have entities that engage in activities. You have decision points. We'll see some example processes in just a minute, but that are modeled, and those models kind of help clarify how they actually work. So Apple's supply chain process, as you can see, there's your major activities. That is sourcing of suppliers, manufacturing operations, warehousing, and then you have distribution, and then you have product returns. Couldn't draw right of that. Interesting. So sourcing the suppliers are in the United States. They're in China and Europe and Asia. And then they're assembled in Shenzhen, China, and at Foxconn, which is an electronics assembler and manufacturer. From there, they're shipped to one of two facilities, depending on whether they're destined for bulk sales or whether or not these devices are going to be sold at the online Apple store. And then finally, you have returns, which are warranties and trade-in. You know, when customers trade in devices, and then when they recycle those returned devices or rework them and then sell them as used. So it's a fairly complex endeavor. And literally thousands of processes are represented by this model. These are some of those processes that are involved in supply chain management: source, order, ship, deliver. Sourcing, again, is about identifying and contracting with and utilizing specific suppliers for specific operations within the manufacturing or operations environment. Then you have ordering, you have shipping, you have delivering, and you have, as you can see down here, you have different actors. You have suppliers, you have customers, you have inspection agents, you have logistics providers. Okay, so some customer-facing processes: customer service, customer sales, order fulfillments, customer returns. Customers are going to interact directly with these processes. Doesn't necessarily make them any more valuable. It simply means that it means that you're going to have direct interaction with your customers, and it's much more transparent if you have issues with these particular processes. So companies tend to emphasize systems investments in these processes. It doesn't necessarily make them any more important than business-facing processes, because business-facing processes like processing payables, processing receivables, managing inventory, reconciling inventory, shipping your product, all of these are absolutely critical as well, but they're not as transparent to the customer. But they're fairly critical as well. So here's an example of, this is a process diagram, or one form of one anyway, and it's showing the flow from sales, where an order is entered in, and that order has a particular configuration for a product, and now you're going to schedule the manufacturing of that product. So you've got production planning, and materials are procured, or you've got the purchasing activity. You've got the overall planning of all the aspects of that product as far as manufacturing, and you see the various areas that are involved in that, in the planning process, materials handling, engineering, accounting, quality, customer service. Then ultimately you're going to manufacture it, ship it, invoice it, and then collect the cash, and then you're going to support it. So a very complex process. In every one of these areas, there's the potential, perhaps not, to apply information systems in some way to augment or enhance these processes, whether it's computer integrated manufacturing technology, whether it is an advanced ERP system that might embed a lot of this process, the information aspects of these processes in software. It could be sales. How are the orders entered in? Well, they're entered in by the customer, who's entering the information in through our intranet, if you will, website. Business-facing process, again, different, but still essential. And this is reconciliation of looks like. Oh, this is invoice reconciliation. So this is an example of invoice reconciliation. Absolutely critical. You have to be able to reconcile invoices with goods received. And make sure it's accurate. If you're paying more than you should for things you're buying, so your basically reconciliation is reconciling an invoice with shipping documents. Process improvement is there's two kinds of activities businesses engage in. One on a more regular basis than others. Think of businesses as like athletes to some extent, is a good way to think about them, where athletes are continually searching for that edge, working on isometrics, trying to, exercise, hone their sport or their craft, and constantly looking for ways to improve. Same thing with businesses. Businesses, their strategy has to involve continually surveying the environment that they operate in, their competition, new technologies on the horizon, because new technologies represent opportunities to augment or enhance processes. And so, value chain analysis, we looked at various ways that companies might use for, determining where they need to augment or enhance their muscles or their processes, if you will, so to say. So, value chain analysis is one approach. SWOT analysis is another. The 5 forces model is another, and you can, as we noted in chapter 2, you can overlap these. So, business process improvement is about measuring what matters to customers, identifying areas where customers have indicated that we may be falling short. It could be in logistics. Or delivery. It could be in after-sales service. Perhaps we've got quality issues associated with manufacturing or operations. And then we're going to monitor, once we identify the processes that seem to be presenting a challenge for us, we're going to monitor those processes. We're going to measure how they're performing, and then we're going to assign someone to be accountable for training or improving this process. And companies do this successful companies do this. It's literally an institutional endeavor. So, you know, they do this systemically all the time. You know, always, you know, good, successful organizations are very good at business process improvement. And process improvement is really about enhancing. It's not really re-engineering. Re-engineering is the other initiative we'll look at. Process improvement is about, you know, tweaking things so that, you know, the gains we're getting, it's about updating outdated practices. It's about gaining greater efficiencies, you know, and there are different ways you can do it. And we'll look at some of these techniques for augmented or enhancing processes. But you know, the gains you actually get are, you know, these you're looking at, you know, these types of percentages when you talk about process improvement. And again, today, in today's business environment, the experience of most customers is often the result of processes that transcend organizational boundaries. So in other words, you know, if you're buying something online from Amazon, odds are pretty good it's not just Amazon that's involved in the process. It's the supplier that is selling through the Amazon website. Also, it's the logistics provider that's delivering that, and it's the back end supply chain operations as well. Let's see. So ways to improve processes: eliminate duplication, combine activities, and you can combine them and embed them in software. That's even better. You can eliminate the need for review or approvals. Eliminate inspections. If you've got a tight command of your manufacturing process, you don't really have to have inspections or any kind of operational process. But that would mean that making incremental measurements and for example, in manufacturing, maybe using technology to photograph and monitor product as it's going through some sort of manufacturing process. Reducing batch sizes. Batching is when you might, let's say you're a bank and you have let's say you're batching sales orders. So you're in sales and you're batching the sales orders, and then at some point you're going to enter those orders in. So they're not being entered in real time. We have someone who's taking their orders at a desk, and they're going to put them in a pile, and then we're batching them, and then ultimately we'll enter them on later when things slow down a little bit. That's batching. Much better to enter that information in live. Demand pull is the manufacturer to order model, essentially. So going from manufacturing to a forecast to manufacturing to the orders that are being submitted. Eliminating, maybe you have a process where in a manufacturing environment, and I've seen these before, where you actually there's an additional step. Maybe it's a customization feature, and you have to move it. Go to a separate line for that customization instead of actually just having that capability on that line. So it could be about teams that have multi-functions. For example, I think it's Harley Davidson. Their motorcycles were the result of they didn't have a traditional manufacturing line for a long time. The motorcycles were worked on by teams, and they had kind of a cellular structure. So a team was assigned to the motorcycle, and they would manufacture it in that way. There's some advantages for that. Some disadvantages. Ultimately, I think they've kind of transitioned to a traditional manufacturing environment, assembly line type process. Why do companies improve processes? Because their competition forces it, customers demand it, technology enables it. Rebecca, I see a question, each team would build one at a time. Yes, at one time that was the Harley-Davidson manufacturing model. So they would work on a single motorcycle and then move on to the next. Web portals, the internet, wanted to mention that because the internet has, of course, enabled organizations, the internet can be embedded into organizational processes. If you are accessing information, if you are buying something online, obviously the internet is part of that. So everything from order entry to customer service can be accessed by customers and extended by employees, and it can be done so on a 24-hour basis. So, for example, there's a company out there that provides X-ray interpretation service for hospitals. So you have a physician, presuming someone who specializes in this particular area, and their doctors, and they evaluate. They offer a service where they evaluate what the medical condition of someone who has had an X-ray taken, and because of the internet, they're able to locate these people all around the globe and offer their customers 24 hours a day, 7 day a week service. And there are many business models premised on the same concept. Whatever the service, the information-based service they deliver, they can locate their service providers in such a way as to span the globe and offer that 24-hour day, 7 day a week service. So, the internet can be used to extend functionality and also obviously entice customers to actually, do a little work for your organization, enter in information, shop online, to a large extent process their own transactions. And the internet can be used securely. So the thing of the internet really is it's two things. It's the World Wide Web standards, and it's the World Wide Web and its standards, and it's a network infrastructure whereby which you can use those standards for extending operations to customers. Also, as you will find out when we talk about business to business, it is a way to integrate operations between organizations, and to do it cost effectively and to do it securely, as long as you're using things like encryption. So the internet's very powerful for us. Wireless technologies represent really dynamic, changing, technologies. Changes in the way people are connected. Wireless means you can now connect back to some system wirelessly. You are no longer tied to a data cable that is connected to an office. Your office can be a mobile office. Regardless of what you are doing for an organization, whether you're driving a truck for FedEx or UPS, whether you're someone working for an insurance company, and who is a claims adjuster, whether you're a repairman for an elevator company and you need to access wireless schematics because your customer has a service contract with your firm to maintain the operation of that elevator in this building, which is 150 stories high. Wireless connectivity has implications for all of those processes. Cloud is another initiative. Cloud is nothing more than a cloud is a data center. And so today a data center is a structure that has massive computing. It has massive computing and storage capabilities. And so a cloud, you can now upload into a cloud things like, for example, Hyatt Motels, which has properties all over the world, and they need to constantly train personnel or employees that work in their hotels. And it varies significantly from job to job, site to site. Obviously, if you're in 53 countries, you got language issues. Doing training on site is really, really challenging for a variety of reasons. Logistics, cost, obviously. So they turned to a cloud-based solution which provided training and development and could be delivered to mobile devices. It also had communication capabilities, and again, the new system that they implemented in the cloud addressed the language and geographic requirements as well. So you've got cloud. Cloud is just a general technology evolution. 10 or 15 years ago, you heard the word cloud, and companies were skeptical about moving things in the cloud for security. But now, everybody's got something in the cloud. I see a comment, so the feed's back working again. Good. Okay. Yeah, we had challenges with that. For those of you who came in just a little bit later, we had challenges with it on Tuesday's recording, so I'll be going back and reworking that sometime between now and the end of the weekend. Scanning and digitization, storage, processing, very inexpensive now. If you have a building and you have the need to move papers from one floor to the other floor, and you have employees who need access to files, it makes absolutely no sense not to digitize that content. You cannot, work in a building of a certain size by moving files back and forth. So digitization has a number of advantages, and that is, one is you can access it remotely from the comfort of your desk. If you are the digital systems of today will route documents. For example, if you have a team of people who work on contracts for a particular customer, and those documents kind of flow through your organization, one person by the next person, you can You have a routing technology that will automatically do that. So when this person gets finished with it, it's then routed to the next person. And that's process improvement. You don't have to wait on someone to actually drop it in their box. Maybe that some, because even with digital systems, people forget at times. So you have document workflow. We call that document workflow as it flows throughout the organization. In addition to that contract, each iteration of that contract is being saved. So you have digital versions of that contract at every interval. And so every time that document is uploaded and saved again, that system saved it. It's digital versioning. You can even access that content off-site. As long as you've got for example, maybe you're working out in the field. Again, you're our elevator repair person. You need access to technical documentation for a certain model of an elevator that's installed in one of your customer sites. And so you've got your laptop, you establish your VPN, and you access the documentation in the data warehouse, which you're able to easily find because everything in that document management system is indexed. And you really can't lose anything in a digital filing cabinet. Little example of process improvements. This is not a systems initiative. It's just an example of how you really need to kind of think about, where your issues are in a process, what's actually causing the problem. Sometimes it's often not necessarily transparent. So in this case, city was having problems with birds pooping all over a bronze statue, and then they tried various approaches to getting the birds away from it, and ultimately discovered that it was the lighting that was causing the issue. So, by changing the lighting schedule, they were able to resolve it. Phone company. This is you have a phone company that clearly was a result, perhaps was at some point the result of the merger of two separate businesses, and so they have two accounting centers. Good indication that might be the case is they have two accounting centers, and they differ in the way they do some things. For example, process checks. And so they haven't gotten rid of the two accounting systems, but they decided to centralize and automate the bounce check system. So the system for dealing with bounce checks. And that, again, a business process improvement initiative. So when you're improving processes, you got to document how the process works currently. You got to establish how it operates. That is, what are the metrics. So what are the things you're going to measure? So if it's bounce checks, then we're going to measure the rate, or the rate at which each of the accounting centers was able to process the bounce checks. Now, those numbers combined are our metrics. And now if we're looking at a central automated system that's being sold to us by a vendor, or maybe we're going to write it ourselves, either way, then if we're going to invest that money, we need to be targeting a metric that's higher than the production of those two accounting centers. So what are we going to measure? Then by following the process, we're going to measure how well it's performing. And then we're going to identify possible improvements. They might be a system we buy, they might be a system we develop, and then we're going to implement those improvements. And now we're going to go back And we're gonna take that documented process, and we're gonna establish our, we're gonna look at what the metrics are now, and these are what we call our new benchmarks. There are two kinds of measurements. One's how effective is it, and that's like how satisfied is the customer. Well, it's kind of hard to measure customer satisfaction. You can look at, maybe poll a customer and kind of like require them to give you, out of 1 to 5, how satisfied are you? But it's not an objective or a discrete measurement. The discrete measurement is how many checks did you prepare today? How many invoices did you reconcile? How many customers did you serve? Those are objective measurements. Effectiveness is something that we're probably going to be looking at a variety of metrics related to, if we're measuring customer satisfaction, related to the customer in order to measure. Discrete measurements are usually about achieving greater efficiencies. Effectiveness measurements, they're really about doing things better. James Harrington is a process guru, and these are some process alteration in a business is challenging. It's difficult. You are disrupting work organization, you are disrupting information flow, you are disrupting the way, people's jobs in many cases. So it's challenging. And so for that reason, when you're doing process improvement, one of the things you want to be sure of is you recognize that it's really about the process itself, how it's arranged. Do you have duplicate work? Is the technology you're using, is it not up to task? Is it inadequate? In those instances, it's not about employees. It's not to say that sometimes employers are not a problem. They can be, but invariably, if your focus is on improving process, don't focus on the employees. Focus on what the employees have to help them do their jobs or achieve their daily work. So focus on helping them do their jobs better. You want to help them accomplish things faster. You want them to be more accurate. You want them to be more efficient. You want them to be more effective, within the scope of the process that they work in. You want to make sure that you, as well as they, know where their job fits into a process where they work. You want to measure the process. The goal is to change the process, not the person. The goal is you can always improve any process. There are many times it doesn't make sense. If the benefits of process improvement are not outweighed, are outweighed by the cost. If the cost incurred is going to be higher than the benefits you'll get out of it, it's really not advantageous. Years ago, I worked for a trucking firm, and they used to send on a daily basis, we would deliver something like one terminal, the terminal I was working at, we would deliver 150 loads of, it was mainly petroleum-based products in a day. And there would be documentation generated, the product was delivered, and the customer would sign off on the documentation indicating they had received delivery. And then that documentation was brought back, and that was the documentation needed for actually billing the customer for the cost of delivering the freight. It also was, actually, it had nothing to do with the loading. It was that documentation had to be sent to the central office, and we FedExed it every day to the central office. Now, today, it would be kind of ridiculous to do it that way. It would probably be much more cost effective to have that data entered in, have it might be or it may not be. Given the nature of that business, even today, I'm not sure there would be an advantage for that driver to have a wireless device that would be similar to what UPS has, where the customer, when they receive the load, could go ahead and sign it in, and that order would be submitted wirelessly and transmitted to the central office. Honestly, I don't think you would get that. It would mean that you could bill them one day sooner for logistics services, but really there would not be a lot of benefit to that. Now, where can anybody tell me where, if you've got it on a digital form, what are the advantages of that as opposed to, one advantage there, I'll go ahead and tell you, it might help on the data entry side. But, the documentation they get is generated by the fueling terminal. So, it's going to be paper. So they're going to have paper regardless. That's kind of an example where you could improve that process. You could digitize it, but honestly, I don't know that it would. I don't think you'd get any money out of it, just given the nature of that type of business. A lot of paperwork in logistics especially bulk shipping, is still paper. It just doesn't make sense to digitize a lot of it. Okay, you want to develop people, and everybody's in it together. So nobody's an enemy in a process improvement initiative. If there are personnel issues, that's something management can take care of. Focus on if there is an error, what caused it. Focus on what caused it. Sometimes it might be a human error, but in many cases, there might be a human error, but it might be because of a system deficiency. For example, maybe we have a process where 1,000 times a day, we're a cable company, and customers move from one location to another. And so, 100 times a day, somebody working in customer service has somebody who moves, and they move to another location, and they're still going to be the customer. So, in other words, they're just moving their service from one location to another. And they have a cutoff date when they want the service off, and then they have an activate date. And so your software, maybe a customer calls in and says, okay, I want you to activate the service at this location on this date, and I want you to cut it off over here on the same date. And then the customer calls back and says, well, they told me that I couldn't move in for another week. So add a week, so maybe it was March 1st. Now it's March the 7th. But the employee doesn't ask about the deactivation date, and so the site where they live in, they turn it off on the 1st of March. Okay, now you can say that that's the fault of the problem, that's due to an error by the employee, but you could also look at it from a process perspective and say, well, why didn't we have the system remind the employee that this customer was moving, had a deactivation date associated with them as well. They were moving from a location. So what caused the error? And again, don't focus on the individual. Focus on why somebody who's dealt with that situation, deals with it about 100 times a day, might forget to ask. You want to reduce variation in the output of the process. You want it to be accurate. You want it to be fast. You want it to be the same every time. And you want the change to be driven by the customer. So all good advice. Now, another type of process change that organizations implement is reengineering, and that is radical alteration, and that is often achieved through the strategic use of technology. So, in other words, technology. If you look at some of the businesses that we've talked about, they really represent dramatic alteration of process. I mean, Amazon is a complete radicalization of how, is a radical alteration of how retailing was traditionally done, and it is a accumulation of business process reengineering in a variety of different key processes within the retail space. Reengineering projects, they're very similar to major software initiatives, which really are when you go through a major software initiative. Once you're immersed in it, you realize, wow, this is a really radical reengineering initiative that's going to change a lot of our information processes. So, in those types of projects, you define the scope of your initiative, and you do that because in any kind of reengineering, there's always that there's that lure of expanding what we want to improve on or redesign or re-engineer. So you want to kind of keep that in control. You're going to identify. It depends on if you're doing the software initiative yourself, but you're going to identify those low-value processes and decide alternatives for them, or if it's an enterprise system initiative, those alternative processes are going to be embedded in that software. You'll evaluate alternatives, then you'll devise plans for implementing them. Then you do. You're going to assess each one of those possible alternatives from an economic perspective, and ultimately you present to management for approval. Some re-engineering initiatives can be the result of a combination of policies. So here's a kind of a well-known one with Ford. Ford in the 90s, Ford was a big company. They were bigger than Mazda. They bought Mazda actually in the 90s. And they employed about 500 people in accounts payable. They had a lot of inefficiencies. And the reason is one of the things Ford had, they had a lot of invoicing coming in that was modified. So in other words, Ford would buy something from a vendor. Let's say 50 bumpers for a particular model car, and then they'd receive 55, and so therefore their invoice that they got, which was for 55, did not match their purchase order. So in invoice reconciliation, you reconcile the PO with the invoice with the shipping documentation. And so they had all of these people. A lot of these people were employed for that kind of reconciliation. So they thought they could implement use information technology to automate or enhance a lot of this. But then they realized when they visited Mazda had, even though Mazda was significantly smaller than Ford, they had like 5 people in accounts payable. And so Ford, after seeing how Mazda managed it, they implemented invoiceless processing. So what that means is when the PO initiates an order, it goes into an online database. And when the goods arrive at the dock, the clerk checks the database to see if it corresponds with the PO. If it does, then they accept the goods and enter the transaction in the system. Now here's the key. If it doesn't, they return the order. They just send the truck back out. And that's what Mazda had. They had invoiceless processing for. So in other words, they have a system where that receiving clerk could match that PO up to what was received. And if it didn't match the PO, it was sent out. They reduced by the way, this was a re-engineering initiative because they eliminated a lot of people doing this simply with a policy change in an online database accessible by their shipping folks. They reduced that workforce by about 75%, digitized their accounting process associated with receiving, and improved vendor relationships ultimately. Taco Bell's Minus initiative was another one. They, in the case of Taco Bell, they took food preparation, took it out of the restaurants, moved it to centralized commissaries. So not so information system intensive in that initiative, just quite a dramatic change in the way they did food preparation. Let's see, where are we? Okay, again, we talked about process modeling. And a process model is, a way of showing a sequence of tasks. Again, you have rectangles. You have decision points represented by the diamonds. And a good way to look at a process, in terms of when you model processes for improvements, you want a before and after snapshot of it. So how does it work before? How does it work after? You probably never thought of a value mill or a combo mill as being not a re-engineering, but a process improvement initiative, but it is because it increased both sales and it simplified ordering. So a customer, when they order a combo mill, they simply ask for one item and you only have to key one item in. Or if you have the kiosks, if you go into a lot of McDonald's, you have kiosks where the customer can place their own order, and that simplifies the ordering process. Here you have an order fulfillment process where, again, an order is placed and ultimately we're going to ship the order and then invoice it. And as you can see, if you look over here to the left, this is one way of documenting processes. You've got your entities or your functional areas that are involved. So your customer generates the order and gives it to sales, who then submits it. The order is received by billing in this particular organization. They check the credit of the customer. You got a decision point here. If there are issues, then we're going to verify if it's okay. If it's not, the order is going to be canceled. However, if it is, the order ultimately will be approved. Down here, we're going to allocate inventory. If it's available, then we pack and ship. If it's not available, we're going to order, but ultimately we're still going to pack and ship. And then once we ship, we're going to invoice. And we don't send the invoice till there's verification that the order has been shipped. So, and then at that point, we're going to hopefully we should receive payment soon thereafter. Now, this particular process has some challenges. sales reps batch the orders. So in other words, when the order is generated and given to the salesperson, they batch it. There are also a lot of steps in that process. Some of them that in this overall process, some of them are unnecessary. There's no need to check credit, especially if this is B2B. There's no need to check the credit for old and new customers. I would argue that you probably do if you're selling to individuals, since credit ratings change. And so credit checking holds things up. So here's a new revamp process where, the order is generated, submitted by sales. The sales individuals probably we've automated that, or we could actually have a process where the customers are entering the orders themselves. So it's automatically submitted. Then it goes to billing. The credit is checked if appropriate. If not, if it's an established customer, we're not going to check their credit. And everything else pretty much looks the same, but we've eliminated batching and we've eliminated credit checks. All right, so when processing, if you're deciding on a process to re-engineer, these are criteria for determining whether or not you need to do something as dramatic as re-engineering, because re-engineering really is much more radical than just improving processes. Improving processes are things like giving you a new model for your handset that's got better software on it. It's going to allow you to do more things. If you're a driver, let's say you're a driver for UPS, and instead of the Diode 4, they give you the Diode 5, which is that little wireless device, and it's got some better features in it. It probably has better connectivity than the older wireless device. The software functionality of it's better. It's definitely an improvement. And there's gonna be some benefits gained because you're not going to spend as much time. You're not going to spend as much time dealing, with processing an order with a customer. You'll be able to get it done quicker. You won't have problems with the signatures like you've had in the past. You won't lose connection with wireless networks in the area that you're driving. So it's going to be an improvement, but it's not a radical re-engineering. A radical re-engineering is, again, we're going to go from we're going to transition our traditional retail model to an online retail model, and that presents a lot of risks. So, why would you do that? Is the process broken? The overall, in this case, would be the business, and that would mean that primarily your competition had shifted to an online retail model. Is it feasible that the re-engineering will succeed? Will it have a large impact on the strategy, the long-term strategy, organization, or the direction? Does it impact customer satisfaction? Is this a customer-driven initiative? Is the process antiquated, which kind of ties in with, is it broken? Is it below best in class? Again, same thing. Is it crucial for improving productivity? So that would be one. Will savings, usually engineering initiatives involve some automation. Will we have clear savings, or a high return on investment? So the answers to those questions need to be yes, or not all of them, but those are some criteria that need to be evaluated. A couple of engineering initiatives, re-engineering initiatives that worked out pretty well. Well, just some examples of kind of dramatic changes. One re-engineering initiative is hire a specialized person to do an activity that, you know, a lot of assemblers had been doing before. A rather simple re-engineering initiative, but in this case, the specialization, you know, actually saved the company a lot of money in lost time. Okay, so that concludes plug-in B2. Moving forward, we will think topics. Let's see. We'll move into. I'm going to go ahead and modify. We'll move into chapter 4 on Tuesday of next week. But I am going to push the test to Thursday, so you have an extra couple of days to study for it. And I'm doing that mainly to align this class with my my in-class session. And again, because they're a little bit behind, and I really didn't have time to go through this entire presentation with them. Okay, let's take the roll. Also, I need to go back and re-record that little 30-minute segment that's missing from Tuesday's class. Okay, hang on just a moment. Don't enter it in yet. I forgot I needed to capture that roll, so hang on. Okay, there we go. Yep, I've got it. Okay. All right.